The richest countries in the world are the countries that have the most suicide, anxiety, depression, and physical pain. And this is by many different measures, many different survey measures, many different types of studies. So clearly we have something very strange going on here. We're now essentially more miserable than ever. And the question is why? Why would that be? I think one of the most important findings in neuroscience in the last 100 years is that pleasure and pain are co-located, by which I mean that the same parts of the brain that process pleasure also process pain, and they work like opposite sides of the balance. So when we do something that's pleasurable or reinforcing or rewarding, that balance tips to the side of pleasure. When we experience something painful, like cutting our finger, it tips to the side of pain. But one of the overarching rules governing this balance is that it wants to remain level. It doesn't want to be tipped for very long, either to pleasure or pain. The brain will work very hard to restore a level balance, or what neuroscientists call homeostasis. The problem with modern life is that we have too many pleasurable substances and behaviors, and that is actually stressing us out. It's literally stressful. So when we do something just obviously pleasurable, like having a beer or playing a video game or eating a piece of chocolate, it depends who you are because people are different. But in general, those things are pleasurable to many people. What we do is we get a little tilt to the pleasure side and we get the release of dopamine. But here's really the key. The way that the brain restores a level balance or homeostasis after this deviation to the pleasure side is to not just bring it level again, but tilt it an equal and opposite amount to the side of pain. And that's called the opponent process reaction. And I sort of think of that as these little gremlins that represent neuroadaptation, hopping on the pain side of the balance, but they like it on the balance, so they stay on until it's tipped an equal and opposite amount. That's that moment of wanting just one more video game, another beer, another piece of chocolate. Another major rule of this balance is that with repeated exposure to the same or similar stimuli, that initial response gets weaker and shorter in duration, and the after response gets stronger and longer. So we go from shorter and weaker to stronger and longer on the pain side of the balance. And that is the fundamental sort of paradox or vicious cycle that we get into, especially when we're living in a world in which we have nearly universal, ubiquitous access to highly potent, highly reinforcing drugs and behaviors, which don't just release a little bit of dopamine, but a whole huge bolus. And we're all surrounded by them all the time, every day. And over time, what that means is that we're bombarding our dopamine reward pathway with way more dopamine than our primitive brains can handle. That means that it's easier to tip it to the side of pain, and it's really, really hard now to experience pleasure. And we need a lot more pleasure to do it. And when we're not using, we're in a state of anxiety, universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance, anxiety, irritability, insomnia, dysphoria, and craving for our drug. If you look at rates of depression and anxiety all over the world today, they are going up, skyrocketing. Suicide rates too. Also physical pain. And I do think that the pleasure-pain balance explains that. Because our primitive brains were not wired for an easy, hyper-convenient world, we are suffering as a result of all of this access to these feel-good things. The first thing that we need to do is to cut out all of these feel-good substances and behaviors, at least for long enough for those neuroadaptation gremlins to hop off and for homeostasis to be restored.
Dopamine fast.
Yeah, essentially dopamine fast. Now, in my clinical experience, in my practice, because I have patients who come in seeking help for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and the first thing that I will typically do is to have them cut out their feel-good drugs and behaviors. And it's hard to do because I'm depressed and anxious, and that's why I'm using, because it relieves it. And what we're not able to see is the true cause and effect of, because I'm using this substance repeatedly and bombarding my, dopamine reward pathway, that is why I'm depressed and anxious.